All right, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm going to come at this topic with a bit of a controversial take. The reason being is it's a really popular trend at the moment that I've been seeing over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years at least. And I've had a lot of interesting conversations with people about this topic and have shared my thoughts. And whenever I've done that with people, they've suggested that I put together a podcast episode on this topic just because I think it's maybe a little different to what the trend is showing. Now, the reason why I want to talk about morning routines is because I think they've actually become a bit of a crutch and a bit of a trap for a lot of people. You know, it's interesting when you have a routine that you create for yourself that you feel reliant on, then in my opinion, the routine has actually become disempowering. And the reason I say that is because if you feel like you can't have a day that is productive or successful, or that you experience some level of achievement without having some kind of routine in place that leads you up to that, then it's almost as if you're basically saying to yourself, who I am as I am with everything that I have within me won't be enough to be able to achieve what I'd like to achieve for myself. Not unless I have this routine in place and this routine in place and this routine in place, which is kind of interesting. I'm very much about people empowering themselves and making sure that they give themselves all the appropriate tools, frameworks, and insights to help create some kind of forward momentum with whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. But what I see with some morning routines, and this was me many years ago, God, it must have been about 8 years ago now, when I started implementing morning routines, and I noticed that I was starting to feel that if I didn't have these things in place, my day wouldn't feel right. But that's when I started to wake up to this realization that some days, like, you just don't get to, right? Life can be messy. Life isn't as structured and as rigid of a calendar as we'd like to think it is in Google Calendar, for example. So we want to make sure that we have an adaptability and a flexibility to life that allows for life to occur and us not to feel deterred or swayed or wobbly because we didn't have our morning routine set up. And so this can look like anything from journaling, meditating, having some kind of spiritual practice, having some kind of visualization technique, or having ice baths, or breath work, or having some kind of session where you're contemplating different aspects of your life on a regular basis every day in the morning. For some people, it's even the routine of having a coffee or a hot beverage is really important, and they feel like their day is ruined if they don't have that coffee in the morning. And it could be anything, right? It could even be a walk, a morning walk or a workout. A lot of people use their workouts as a way to start their day. But the challenge is with these different routines is that if you feel like you don't have them in place, are you able to make the most of your day anyway? Are you still able to have a productive, quote unquote, successful or meaningful day and get to the end of your day and look back and say, I still did well regardless of the circumstances? That's my preference for you, that you're able to do that regardless of what your morning routine is and whether or not you have rigidity around that, because it does actually become disempowering. It becomes something that you're relying on to make you feel a certain way before you can go and start something, which, if you actually think about it, can create compulsive behavior. It's like you feel like you can only use a specific type of bathroom, right? Or you feel like in order for you to be able to have a meal at a particular time, you need to have this meal at a particular time, and it becomes very compulsive. It becomes very controlling. And in my opinion, that's usually when it's being influenced by some level of fear. Whether that fear is conscious or unconscious is different on the person. But I definitely see that there's this correlation between people who are trying to create a lot of rigidity around their routines and setting themselves up for the day ahead the way they think they're supposed to, or the way they think is going to make them feel best, because of all these different routines and rituals and so on that they put in the beginning of the day and sometimes at the end of their day as well. I'm more interested in how adaptable you can be. How flexible can you be with an experience? How much can you just roll with the way life unfolds regardless of how it unfolds, regardless of what routines are given to you, or what routines you have, rather? Because life is going to throw all kinds of challenges, all kinds of curveballs at you. And so you want to make sure that you're prepared for that more than having these strict routines in place. Now, as an example, for me, many years ago, one of the routines I had was I would get up in the morning, First thing I would make my coffee. I would have my coffee. I would have my breakfast. I would get ready for the day. And then I would sit down and meditate before I did anything else. And while I loved meditating and I still appreciate meditating, I found that if I didn't meditate at that particular point, I would feel like the rest of my day was thrown off. And then I would get to the end of the day and I'd look back and go, it was because I didn't meditate. That's the problem. And what I realized when I was being honest with myself and questioning myself on that, I found that the issue wasn't that I didn't meditate. The issue was that I didn't do something that gave me a certain feeling. And so then I felt like there was no way for me to recover from that. So it was almost like I believed that I was tying my hands behind my back by not meditating at the beginning of the day, at this particular junction of my day. And while there's a lot of science that backs up the value of meditation, I don't want to undermine that in any way, shape, or form, but the issue isn't the act itself. The issue is the meaning that we associate with whatever the act is. Because if we place too much meaning or too much value into it, then we're actually giving a sense of our power to whatever the ritual or the routine is, instead of giving ourselves the opportunity to extract the value from it. Meaning, if you're doing ice baths and you're trying to extract the physiological or the psychological value from putting yourself through that experience each day, then what you can do is you can set yourself up to a point where it's like, if I don't have this today, my day is ruined. That's when you're giving it your power rather than it empowering you. The same is true for training at the gym. The same is true for journaling. The same is true for meditating. If you feel like you can't have a solid or decent day without that, then it has control over you. It's somewhat like, I saw this meme or this quote many years ago around tech companies, and that they don't call their, especially software companies like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and so on, where they said it's one of the only companies that call their customers users. And it's really fascinating to me because what we see is that the tool ends up using the individual rather than the individual using the tool. And I think I see that a lot when I'm talking to people about morning routines and they tell me about these really elaborate routines that they have for themselves. I immediately start to see that, like, this isn't a tool that you're using for yourself. You think you are. You've convinced yourself that you are. But in reality, this tool is using you. It has power over you. Now, what's important to remember here is that the only way that a tool or a method or a routine or a ritual can have power over you is if you allow it to, if you give it that empowerment to do so and that control to do so. The ultimate control is in your hands. You get to decide. But I see a lot of people doing that, and they do that with their phones, right? People think that they're in control of their behavior with their phones, but they're not. And one of the ways I challenge people on that is I tell them to make the bedroom a no phone zone, no device zone, no phones, no tablets, nothing. They stay out for the night. And so it means going and getting like a traditional alarm clock, for example, if you need to rely on an alarm to wake you up in the morning. And it's quite challenging for people whenever I bring that up. They're like, what do you mean? No phone in the bedroom? How could I possibly do that? But then typically what I see for these people is that they're scrolling right before they fall asleep. They're laying in bed scrolling. Or first thing in the morning, they're checking their phone and they're going through their messages and scrolling on social media and can't quite work out why they're feeling crap or why their day is starting off so crappy. And I'm like, well, because the tool is using the individual, not the other way around. You're not using it for anything valuable before bed, laying in bed, before you go to sleep. And you're certainly not using it for anything valuable first thing in the morning, right? The real value of it, if you're going to have it in the bedroom, is the alarm clock function, which you can get for only, $10, $20 on Amazon. You'll get an alarm clock that'll do the exact same job without the Wi-Fi connection and without the social media apps. So you want to make sure that you're the one that's running the show for yourself. And if you're using morning routines as a way, or even evening routines as a way to try and maintain that control, then there's probably some kind of fear or anxiety that's fueling that. So you want to do it because it just genuinely inspires you. You find it valuable from a productivity standpoint where you see valuable results from it, not because of the emotional crutch that it becomes. And I'll give this story to you that I don't think I've shared publicly before. It involves an interesting character. I'm not going to name names, but this gentleman, he's an entrepreneur, a coach as well, I believe. And he's been in the space for some time. But basically what was happening was He was helping people structure their day and create a lot of structure in their calendar and building out their day the way he thought they would love to. The story he came up with putting together this program, he even wrote a whole book about how to do this for yourself, how to create as much structure throughout your day and as many routines as you can, and be very intentional with, I think it was down to the 15-minute blocks of your entire day, from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. And when he started showing up in my world, and I was kind of curious. He had a lot of people praising him for it, and I thought, okay, maybe there's something here. But then I started digging through the content, and I also started digging through the story of where all of this originated for him. And I realized that this was actually setting people up to create a crutch and a way to alleviate their anxieties and fears, which is what he did. And I didn't see any true sustainability in the behavior or the process that he was encouraging people to use. And I didn't think it really had any longevity, to be completely honest. What I found was where it all came from for him was there was a day he was doing some work that he was doing at the time, and he was with an individual. And while he was with that individual, he started having a panic attack. At the time, he didn't realize it was a panic attack, so he went to the emergency department. He thought he was having a heart attack. They identified, and this happens a lot in emergency departments, they identified that it was just a panic attack. And there was nothing to be concerned about in terms of his heart health or his cardiovascular system. And it was his first panic attack. He didn't know how to deal with it. And what he believed was the source of the panic was that he had too much freedom with his time. And so the solution that he believed was going to solve any future panic attacks or anxieties, because he didn't want to experience that pain again, was to create as much structure and rigidity around the way he managed his time and his days. Now, to me, that's an overcompensation for what he believed was the source of the panic and the anxiety. In reality, the reason why we experience panic and anxiety, and I've got a whole podcast episode on this, so make sure you go check it out. But the reason we experience panic and anxiety is because we perceive we're trapped by something. And so his solution to solving that problem was to create a lot of rigidity, which for a lot of people tends to feel like a trap. Now, granted, there is freedom and discipline in having structure and creating a plan for yourself, but with adaptability and flexibility built in. And so he started creating this whole program, and he built a lot of reputation around being able to help people with creating as much structure and rigidity in their day. So everything was planned out. There was no element of surprise that was allowed. And that would make you the most efficient and effective individual you possibly could be. And I started meeting people going through his programs, and I'm like, listen, I've got to be completely honest with you. You will probably see him change his narrative in a few years' time when he realizes this doesn't actually work. And I suspect it's going to come from the result of him being in a relationship with somebody who doesn't want any structure, doesn't see as much value in it, and wants spontaneity and wants the opportunity for the serendipity or the serendipitous aspects of life to show up. You can't do that if everything's structured right down to rigidity, right down to 15-minute intervals especially. And inevitably, within a few years of me saying that, that's exactly what ended up happening. He started then promoting that having morning routines is not the way to do it. Having this really rigid structure isn't the way to do it. And he started changing his tone and changing his whole approach, as far as I understand. And I thought it was really, good on him for doing so and for being willing to change the narrative, because he started seeing different results. But I think it was really telling of the truth about morning routines and structures and rigidity. Now, I'm somebody who has a very full calendar, which is the complete opposite of the way I used to live my life many, many years ago. I didn't like the idea of having a calendar. Appointments kind of freaked me out. This was before I got into coaching. And I honestly didn't think that I would be somebody who would live by a calendar or structure in any way. But to this very day, that's how I live my life. A lot of things are scheduled into my calendar in order for me to make sure that I get things done, but also to make sure that I'm meeting people at their appropriate times that we've agreed to and so on. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to stay on top of it. So it serves me. But I also built in a lot of flexibility and adaptability into my schedule and into my structures to allow for me to have life to happen. Because life happens in mysterious ways when we allow room for that to happen. If you create a lot of structure to the point where there's no flexibility, you end up becoming emotionally dependent on these crutches and these routines and these rituals that you have. So you have all these structures and these routines and rituals that you're leaning on, not realizing that they're somewhat of a trap because you're emotionally dependent on them. And it doesn't allow for the serendipity and the synchronicity of life to show up because everything's so structured. You're only focusing on what is to be done next. And so I want to encourage you to sort of challenge yourself. If you have morning routines that you're very insistent on having and that they've got to be there for you, I want you to challenge yourself to see if you can try a day without them and see how you genuinely feel. And pay attention to what the emotion is that's showing up. Pay attention to how you're feeling about not having it there, and then pay attention to what emotional feeling you're getting from having it there, because you want to be able to resolve that so it's not a dependence. You want to ask yourself, and this is something that I love asking people when it comes to their routines, is like, what if you were never allowed to do that again? What if you had to live the rest of your life not being able to do whatever that routine is or whatever that ritual is? What do you think would actually happen to your life? Would you just like slowly depreciate and sort of like shrivel up into this bare existence of a human being? Or would you just find a way to roll with that punch and make the most of life anyway? So you want to challenge yourself on the things that you're leaning on. This is also a question beyond routines, right? This is a question of the things that you might be relying on for a sense of security, either consciously or unconsciously, that you think are giving you value, but you're not necessarily being honest with yourself about what it is that you're getting value from it on. Like if you're leaning on money to give you a significant sense of security, and you're not realizing that the thing that's actually genuinely providing you security is your ability to go out and work, which earns the money, then it starts to help you change your relationship with these different elements of your life and these different aspects of your life in an empowering way. Because you want to be able to make sure that you're claiming your power back rather than putting your power into these things, these routines, these rituals, these objects, or these aspects of our lives. I see too often that people are unconsciously disempowering themselves without even realizing it. So I hope this is food for thought. I hope it gets you thinking. And maybe if you've got a friend who is into morning routines and evening routines and really strict about them, maybe send them this episode, get them to listen to it and check it out, because it might be enough to sort of help them break out of it. So it's not a dependence, but it's more of a something that they're just enthusiastic about or inspired by, something that they love doing, but they're also fine not doing. That to me is when you're at a place where you feel like you don't need something, that's when you're truly empowered. If you feel like you need it, then there's a dependence there. And that dependence can create volatility as time goes on. So if I can help you create a little more stability around these things in your life, you'll probably empower yourself significantly more than what most people are doing. And that's what I'm here to help you do. So anyway, I hope that was valuable. Bit of a different topic, different perspective on something. I know it's a little controversial and I'm asking people to kind of, maybe let go of their teddy bear, so to speak. But my intention is that by doing so, you might actually start to empower yourself in ways that you didn't even realize you could. So anyway, I hope that was valuable. Please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast and make sure that you leave a review. It makes a huge difference in helping us reach more people, because you never know. It might just change somebody's life by you helping prop up the podcast and put it in front of other people. All right, with that being said, I'm Giorgio. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next episode.